Have you ever tried playing like a really complex board game with a group of friends, but nobody can quite agree on the rules?
Oh yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
Right. Like someone tries to play a card, and then someone else shouts that it's an illegal move, and before you know it, you aren't even, playing the game anymore.
Yeah, you're just arguing about how the game's supposed to be played.
Exactly. And when people can't agree on the rules, the entire system just collapses. And, well, back in 1787, the United States was basically collapsing for that exact same reason.
It was pure chaos, honestly. I mean, without a central, agreed-upon rule book, the entire experiment of the country was just grinding to an absolute halt.
Which is why today we are decoding the ultimate rulebook. We're doing a deep dive into an incredibly essential text. It's a source document titled The Supreme Law, Structure and Principles of the U.S. Constitution.
It's a heavy title, but it's important.
Very important. And our mission on this deep dive is to cut through all the noise and really show you the invisible architecture that governs your daily life.
Yeah, because, this isn't just some dusty historical artifact sitting under thick glass in a museum somewhere. Right from the start, the source material establishes the stakes for you. It is the quote-unquote supreme law of the land.
Which means?
It means absolutely no law can be passed that contradicts its principles, whether it's about, your property, your taxes, or just your personal freedoms.
Wow. So if you've ever wondered why the government takes so long to get literally anything done, or why, say, a single court ruling can suddenly change the rules of the internet, today we're going to show you exactly why.
Yeah, we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're here to help synthesize all this dense material because, well, you've always had a real talent for zooming out and seeing the big picture.
Oh, well, thank you. I try.
So, okay, let's unpack this because
Yeah.
before we look at the actual mechanics of the Constitution, we kind of have to look at the massive problem it was trying to solve, right?
Right, because this document wasn't actually their first attempt at a government.
Yeah. The text notes that the Constitution was established between 1787 and 1789, specifically to replace something called the Articles of Confederation. And the source specifically describes those articles as weak.
Weak is probably putting it mildly.
Yeah.
To use like a modern analogy, the Articles of Confederation are basically a terrible beta test of a software program.
Just full of bugs.
Exactly.
But what was the actual bug in the code? Like, why did it keep crashing the system?
Well, the main bug was that the central government had almost no real power at all, especially when it came to, raising money or enforcing rules.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, imagine a group project where there's a designated team leader, but that leader has zero authority to actually make anyone do the work or, pay for the materials.
This sounds like a nightmare.
It really was. Under the Articles, the states were basically just this very loose alliance acting like 13 completely independent countries.
So they were just doing whatever they wanted.
Pretty much. They were printing their own money, getting into actual trade wars with each other, and the central government couldn't even levy taxes to pay for a military. So it was just far too fragile to hold a growing nation together.
Okay, so the system was failing, the beta test was crashing, and between 1787 and 1789, the framers got together to write version 2.0.
Right. A massive ground-up overhaul.
And the result, according to our source, was the creation of a federal democratic republic.
Yeah, and that phrase, it represents a massive philosophical pivot.
How so?
Well, for most of human history, the standard operating procedure was that power flowed downward, right? Like a king or a monarch or an emperor held all the power by divine right, and they basically dispensed it downward to the subjects.
Right, the guy at the top has all the control.
Exactly. But a democratic republic flips that entirely. It says the power derives directly from the people. Power flows upward.
And that profound shift is captured right at the start, right? In the preamble.
Yeah, the preamble is essentially the ultimate mission statement.
Let me grab the quote. Our source quotes it directly. It says, the government exists to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty.
And you have to notice the phrasing there. It's so deliberate.
Yeah.
It doesn't say the government exists to enrich the ruling class or, to conquer foreign lands. The purpose of the entire federal government is intrinsically tied to the well-being and liberty of the people.
That's a huge deal.
It really is. It locks in the core governing principle of self-government, the idea that the people are the ultimate source of authority.
But logically, that creates a terrifying logistical problem, doesn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, if the power comes from the people and you are building this powerful new version 2.0 central government
Yeah.
to handle that power. How do you make sure whoever is holding the reins doesn't just decide to keep it all for themselves? I mean, you just got rid of a king. You don't want to accidentally build a new one.
Exactly. And the framers were deeply, deeply paranoid about exactly that.
I would be too.
Right. So their solution wasn't just to build a strong government, it was to build a strong government and then immediately chop it into pieces. You take the immense power of the state and you fracture it.
So instead of a king holding all the cards, you force like a constant game of rock, paper, scissors.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
And this brings us to the first 3 articles of the Constitution, which establish the separation of powers. They didn't just give the government a to-do list, they fundamentally divided the labor.
They absolutely did.
Let's start with the lawmaking power. That goes to the legislative branch, which is Congress. But they didn't even trust Congress with too much power, because the source notes it's a bicameral Congress,
Right, bicameral.
meaning it's split into 2 houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. But why split the lawmakers in half?
Well, it was a compromise, really, to balance power between different types of states. The House of Representatives is based on population, which gives more power to states with a lot of people.
Okay, makes sense.
But the Senate gives exactly 2 seats to every state, regardless of size. And that protects the smaller states from being bullied by the bigger ones.
Oh, I see. So even within the branch that writes the laws, they have to negotiate with themselves before they can even do anything.
Exactly. They have to agree internally first.
Okay, so the legislature writes the rules. But, I mean, a rule is totally useless if nobody enforces it.
Which is why Article 2 establishes the executive branch, so the president and the vice president. The text outlines the rules for their elections, their eligibility, and their powers.
So if Congress is, like, the architect drawing the blueprints, the executive branch is the construction crew that actually builds it and enforces the rules on the ground.
That's a perfect analogy, yes.
And finally, we have Article 3, which creates the judicial branch.
Right. It establishes the U.S. Supreme Court as the highest court in the land, and it gives Congress the power to make lower federal courts.
And their job is to interpret those laws and settle disputes, right?
Exactly. So you have 3 very distinct lanes: making laws, enforcing laws, and interpreting laws.
And here is the genius of the system. They don't just stay politely in their own lanes, do they?
No, not at all. They are designed to actively collide. This is the whole system of checks and balances.
I picture it kind of like a nuclear launch sequence that requires 3 different keys to be turned by 3 different people at the exact same time.
Yeah, that's exactly how it functions. Because Congress can pass a law, but they don't have the final say. The president can veto it.
But the veto isn't a total dead end, because Congress can override that veto if they get enough votes.
Precisely. They can override it, but it requires a massive supermajority, which makes it incredibly difficult.
Right.
And even if they do manage to pass it and override the veto, the judicial branch at the Supreme Court can review that law, and if they find that it violates the rules of the Constitution, they can strike it down entirely.
Okay, I have to stop you here because I really need to push back on this design a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
As someone who really likes to see problems get solved, this sounds awful. I mean, if Congress spends months or years debating a law and finally passes it, but the president can just unilaterally veto it, or worse, years later, the Supreme Court can just erase it entirely. Doesn't that intentionally make the government wildly inefficient?
It does, yeah.
It just sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare deliberately designed to create gridlock.
Well, what's fascinating here is that you're entirely right. It is slow, it is inefficient, it is agonizingly prone to gridlock.
So they messed up.
No, because that friction, that is a feature, not a bug. The framers were absolutely terrified of efficiency when it came to government power.
Wait, really? Because a dictator is highly efficient.
Exactly. One guy makes a rule and you obey it instantly. That's efficiency.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, efficiency in government is often a straight line to tyranny. I mean, if one person or one group can just snap their fingers, make a law, enforce a law, and throw you in jail for breaking it, that's the very definition of tyrannical rule.
Right, because there's no one to stop them.
Exactly. The core principle of the separation of powers is designed precisely to prevent any one branch from becoming dominant. They wanted it to be exhausting to pass a law.
Exhausting. That's a great word for it.
They wanted these 3 branches to constantly be wrestling, testing each other, forcing compromise. If a law actually survives that gauntlet, making it through the House, the Senate, getting the president's signature, and surviving the scrutiny of the courts, It theoretically means it has a very broad consensus of the people.
The inefficiency is the shield that protects your liberty.
Beautifully said. Yes.
That makes a lot of sense when you frame it that way.
Yeah.
It's a deliberate obstacle course. So, okay, we've got the power chopped up at the federal level in Washington, but how does this newly minted, powerful version 2.0 central government deal with the individual states?
That's the next big piece of the puzzle.
Because you still have states with their own distinct identities, right?
Right.
Their own economies, their own local problems. Which brings us to Articles 4 through 7, which I like to think of as the glue.
Right, because you couldn't have a functional country if the states were acting like 50 completely independent islands.
Like they were under the Articles of Confederation.
Exactly. They needed concrete rules of engagement both with each other and with the new federal entity.
So let's look at how they interact with each other first. Article 4 requires states to respect each other's laws and records.
Yes, and the easiest way to visualize this is going on a road trip.
Oh, I love a road trip analogy.
So if you get your driver's license in Ohio and you drive across the border into Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania doesn't pull you over and say you're driving an illegal vehicle because you don't have a Pennsylvania license.
Right, they respect the Ohio record.
Exactly. Or if you get married in New York, you don't have to get remarried when you move to California. It creates a cohesive society.
That makes total sense.
Can you?
It would be a nightmare. So Article 4 prevents that.
Yes.
But what happens when the states and the federal government actively clash? Like, let's say a state passes a law that directly contradicts something the federal government wants to do. Doesn't that just lead us right back to the chaos of the beta test?
Well, that is where Article 6 comes into play. And it contains what is arguably one of the most vital paragraphs in the entire document. It's called the Supremacy Clause.
The ultimate trump card.
Yes.
Our source points out that this establishes federal law as taking precedence over conflicting state or local laws.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, remember earlier when we said the Constitution is the supreme law of the land?
Yeah.
Article 6 is where that is explicitly codified.
Yeah.
This is the true glue of the nation. It ensures that when Washington and a state government get into a fundamental legal dispute, there's a clear, definitive hierarchy. The federal Constitution wins.
But wait, doesn't that make the state governments basically pointless? I mean, if the federal government can just overrule them whenever it wants, why even have state legislatures?
Well, that's a great question, but it's important to understand it's not a blanket veto over everything a state does.
It's not.
No. The federal government only has supremacy in the specific areas that the Constitution actually gives it power over. So things like regulating interstate commerce or printing money or foreign policy.
Oh, okay.
For the vast majority of day-to-day laws like speed limits, zoning laws, or local criminal codes, the states retain immense power. The Supremacy Clause just ensures that on the big national issues, the 50 states don't shatter back into 50 separate countries.
I see. So it's a hierarchy, not a monopoly.
Exactly.
And then, just to round out the original document, the source notes that Article 7 simply outlined the original ratification process. Like, it was just the instructions for how the states actually signed off on this whole version 2.0 system back in the late 1780s.
Yeah, that's basically just the administrative wrap-up. So that gives us the base code. You have the preamble setting the mission, the first 3 articles chopping up the federal power, and the next few articles gluing the states and the federal government together.
But, you know, society isn't static. I mean, it's the 21st century now. The world looks completely different than it did in 1789.
Very true.
So if the Supremacy Clause makes this document the absolute final word, what happens when that final word urgently needs an update? Because a rulebook that can't change is eventually going to break, right?
Right, and the framers entirely anticipated that. They knew they were flawed men, and they knew the country would evolve. That's why the Constitution is considered a living document.
Not because it's magic, but because it contains a built-in mechanism to alter its own text.
Exactly. It is inherently flexible.
And that mechanism is Article V, the amendment process.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting, especially when you look at the raw mechanics of how this works.
The math is pretty astounding.
It is. Our source outlines the math. To pass an amendment to the Constitution, you first need a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress.
Which is hard enough on its own.
Right. And even then, you aren't done. The proposed amendment then has to be sent out to the states, and 3/4 of the state legislatures have to ratify it.
Just let those numbers really sink in for a second. 2/3 of Congress, 3/4 of all the states.
It is mathematically staggering. I like to think about this in the context of, your own life. Try getting an extended family of 50 people to agree on a single pizza topping for a party.
Oh, impossible.
You're guaranteed to have arguments. Someone is dairy-free, someone hates meat, someone demands pineapple just to be difficult. I mean, getting a simple majority of 26 people to agree on pepperoni is a total nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now imagine trying to get 3/4 of 50 vastly different states with completely different cultures, distinct economies, and opposing political views to agree on fundamentally changing the supreme law of the land.
It is designed to be incredibly rare. And the historical record proves just how high that barrier is.
How many amendments are there?
The source notes that to date, there have been exactly 27 amendments.
27 in the whole history of the country.
Yeah. Think about the scope of American history. We're talking about over 2 centuries of massive societal shifts. The Industrial Revolution, the Civil War, 2 world wars, the Civil Rights Movement, the dawn of the Internet, and through all of that, the Supreme Rulebook has only been successfully altered 27 times.
That is wild. And what's even wilder is that the first 10 of those amendments happened almost immediately, right?
It did, yeah.
In 1791, they added what we now know as the Bill of Rights.
Yes, and it's crucial to understand why they bolted those on so quickly. The Bill of Rights guarantees specific personal rights. We're talking about the freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, protection against unreasonable searches and seizures.
But wait, if those things are so important, why weren't they just written into the original text to begin with?
It goes right back to that fear of tyranny we talked about earlier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, many people who are known as the anti-federalists, they looked at this powerful new version 2.0 engine the framers just built, and they were terrified. They felt the new central government was a little too powerful.
So they wanted some guarantees.
Exactly. They demanded explicit written guarantees that this new authority couldn't trample on the individual. They argued that rights aren't gifts given to you by the government. They are inherent.
So these first 10 amendments were essentially a massive boundary-setting exercise.
That's exactly what it was. They drew a hard line in the sand, explicitly stating what the federal government was absolutely forbidden from touching.
Wow. Okay, so to summarize where we are, we have the original articles setting up the structure and the gridlock. We have the 27 amendments, starting with the boundary lines of the Bill of Rights, providing the rare updates.
Right.
But because that Article V process, that 2/3 and 3/4 math, is so incredibly difficult, changing the text today is almost impossible.
It really is.
Which means the most important question for modern society isn't really how to change the document. It's how to read the words that are already there.
And that brings us to the ultimate decoder ring, the modern scholarship and judicial debate.
Because the text is so hard to change, the real battleground is interpretation, right?
Yes. How do judges, especially Supreme Court justices, apply a document written in the 18th century to 21st century problems?
Our source actually highlights the 2 primary lenses used in modern legal scholarship. The first is called originalism, and the text defines this as the belief that the Constitution's meaning was fixed at the very time of its adoption.
Right. Under an originalist view, when you read a clause, your job as a judge is to figure out what those specific words meant to the public at the exact moment they were ratified.
So you can't just change the definition because times have changed.
Exactly. You don't get to update the meaning of the words just because modern sensibilities have evolved. Originalists argue that if the text's meaning changes on a judge's whim, then it isn't law at all, it's just politics.
Makes sense?
If society wants to update the meaning, they argue, you must go through the rigorous Article V amendment process. So it's a strict focus on historical context and fixed definitions.
Got it. Now, on the other side of the debate is a lens called living constitutionalism. The source defines this as the belief that constitutional law should evolve in response to changing values and circumstances.
Yeah, and a living constitutionalist approach argues that the framers were smart enough to know they couldn't predict the future. They argue the framers intentionally wrote the document using broad, sweeping principles, phrases like unreasonable searches or equal protection, specifically so those concepts could adapt over time.
So it's more flexible.
Right. They believe the text shouldn't be locked into the social norms of the 1700s, but should breathe and respond to the complex realities of a modern society.
And to be absolutely clear here, our source presents both of these as the primary analytical frameworks used today. We aren't taking a side here. We aren't saying originalism is better than living constitutionalism or vice versa.
No, absolutely not.
They are simply the 2 completely different languages being spoken. when we try to translate this foundational text into modern law.
Exactly. There are two distinct philosophical approaches to the exact same words. Let's look at a practical example.
Oh, please.
Take the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. In 1791, a search meant a government agent physically kicking down the wooden door of your house and rummaging through your physical papers.
Right. But today, all your private papers, your photos, your location data, they're all on a smartphone in your pocket.
Precisely. So how does the Fourth Amendment apply to digital data? An originalist might look at property rights and trespass laws from the 18th century to determine if hacking a phone constitutes a search, as the framers understood it.
Interesting.
Whereas a living constitutionalist might look at the broad underlying principle of personal privacy and argue that the protection naturally extends to digital data because the core value is the same, even if the technology is completely new.
So both philosophies are trying to faithfully apply the law. They just use very different tools to do it.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why do these two academic-sounding terms matter in your day-to-day life?
Well, this raises an important question because it touches on almost everything you see on the news.
How so?
Whenever you hear about a major Supreme Court ruling, whether it's about, digital privacy, healthcare mandates, or environmental regulations, you are essentially watching this exact philosophical debate play out in real time.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The justices are looking at a modern problem, looking back at the Constitution, and arguing over whether to view it through the lens of originalism or living constitutionalism. And the outcome of that specific debate determines the actual laws you will live under tomorrow.
It's wild to think that a philosophical debate about how to read a piece of paper directly affects, like, the notifications on your smartphone and the rules of your local hospital.
It is wild.
Yeah.
But that is the power of the supreme law.
It really is. Well, let's briefly recap the journey we've taken today. We explored how the Constitution was built as a vital version 2.0 to replace a dramatically weak system that couldn't even pay its own bills.
Right.
We looked at its architecture, a federal democratic republic anchored by a preamble, guaranteeing that power flows up for the people. We examined how they prevented tyranny by fracturing that power into three branches, creating those brilliant, frustrating checks and balances.
The obstacle course.
Exactly. And we saw how the Supremacy Clause acts as the glue holding the 50 states together in a clear hierarchy. And finally, we explored the incredible mathematical difficulty of amending it, which forces us into this high-stakes, ongoing judicial debate over how to interpret its text today.
It really is a masterful piece of structural engineering. But, looking at all of the source material together, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Okay, what is it?
We spent a lot of time on Article V and how incredibly difficult the framers made it to amend the Constitution. That 2/3 and 3/4 consensus is a nearly insurmountable hurdle today.
It really is.
So if the framers could have somehow foreseen the blindingly rapid pace of modern societal and technological change, the internet, globalized economies, artificial intelligence, would they have made that amendment process slightly easier? Or did they intentionally make it nearly impossible, fully expecting that the courts would have to step in and bridge the gap between their 18th century text and our modern realities?
Oh, man. That is a fascinating question to chew on. Is the gridlock we see today an accident of history or the ultimate intended design?
Exactly.
It really brings us back to where we started. If you're going to play the game, you have to understand the rule book. Well, we hope this deep dive helped decode some of that underlying architecture for you. Keep questioning those rules, keep exploring the history, and most importantly, keep learning. Thanks for joining us.